Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode is our goal to help you learn about two soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is Joe DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games they come from without getting too bogged down in music theory. Up first this week for our two games is 2022's Immortality, the interactive movie trilogy that has the player jump from one random scene to the next through a common object found in the frame, while asking the question, what happened to Marissa Marcel?
Following that is the MS-DOS title that is credited with creating the modern concept of survival horror games, featuring a chilling journey to 1920s Louisiana in order to explore the haunted mansion of Deserto, 1992's Alone in the Dark.
Games that are 30 years apart from each other, and yet they still find ways to innovate in their genre. Of course, Immortality didn't invent the interactive movie found footage genre, but it certainly does some interesting things with it that we'll actually go pretty spoiler-free on. Alone in the Dark, on the other hand, I mean, that might as well have invented a whole genre on its own.
Pretty much. I think I would say that Alone in the Dark invented it, but Resident Evil popularized it. But we'll also talk about Resident Evil today, so you'll see.
Well, there you go. Perfect time for spooky games during spooky season. Joe, how are you doing? What are you playing?
I'm gonna be real, I haven't really been playing anything of substance right now. I'm kind of in a slump at the moment. Don't know why. I have been playing a review game, but I can't talk about it yet because it ain't out. In fact, it comes out today at time of release, but the embargo is after the episode would normally go out. And I have not historically had great luck with with doing that before the embargo, so...
But still check out the work on Nintendo World Report. It's probably up.
Yeah, hopefully. If I've done my job right. I'm supposed to be playing the game that I'm talking about next week, but I just haven't been able to get myself to load it up. I've started it, but I haven't made it very far. Otherwise, though, over on twitch.tv/Nintendo World Report, I mentioned last week we're going to do an Oxenfree 2 stream with Alex Freitas of NWR, and those streams happened Friday and Saturday, and man, that game is so good. Oh, that game is the last 2 hours of that game. I think watching it get played again just basically again cemented it as maybe my game of the year, probably.
Okay, that is good to know. And that's a game that's also available through Netflix publishing, like Immortality. So that's super interesting. Wow. For me, I've just been making progress on the games I've been playing, but not too much so. Final Fantasy 16, I beat that boss in the desert. It's a spectacle, all right. Then did a lot of side quest stuff where I guess they're waiting for the next main thing to develop, which we're going off to that Mother Crystal now, 65% through 21 hours in. Persona 4 Golden, I beat Secret Base, so we're just dreading the month in between with Heaven coming up. So doing a kind of quicker playthrough of that since I've just saw it be played. And Assassin's Creed Mirage is out, so that's up on my list of what's up next. Sorry, it leapfrogged Sea of Stars.
Yeah, I still got to start Sea of Stars. I did both of the things that I said I had to do before I was allowed to start Sea of Stars, and then I didn't start Sea of Stars.
Amazingly, more games come out. Time moves on. Well, speaking of time, we're recording in advance, so once again, if we talked about any news headlines, they'd be well out of date, so we're just not going to do that this week to get around things and make it work for our schedules. So let's just get right into it. Spooky season. We're both bringing spooky games to the table. It doesn't happen too often, but I think it's high time that we talk about immortality on this show. Not the concept, of course, just the game, which of course makes it a real fun time when you're Googling and it's just, you got to be immortality game. I don't need to know about people speculating on what's immortality like. So Immortality is a game that we've mentioned on the show that we're like, hey, we're going to bring it to the show in October. You should play it before it goes off of Game Pass. It's unfortunately off of Game Pass by now. But I think if you're a Netflix subscriber and you get it on mobile, like that should grant you access in case this, has any curiosity for you at all. It's also a game that hinges on one big twist. And we're not going to spoil that today. We're still going to do our best. We may mention something at the very end, but it'll be one of those things where it's like you won't know what we're talking about until you play it. So at the top, that's kind of how we're handling Immortality spoilers. Should still be good to talk about the game and its music because Immortality released for PC and Xbox Series X and S on August 30th, 2022. There is a mobile version on iOS and Android that released on November 16th, 2022. Also a Mac version on April 5th, 2023. It is developed by Sam Barlow and published by Half Mermaid Productions, with Netflix publishing the mobile versions. I really should have done that. I want to download the game on like an Apple TV. Because I really want to show my fiance this game. Should have tried logging in and see if a Netflix subscription account works to just give you access to the game. It should, but
so for Oxenfree 2, that was Alex's original plan, was to load it up on Netflix. It seems that in terms of Netflix games, your options are install it to your phone and play it on your phone, or stream it to your TV and use your phone as a controller, which sounds awful.
Weird.
Those are the only two ways that we could find, and Alex, of course, ended up just buying it on Steam.
At that point, I think that sounds about right. So how you can play this game is a little wonky. It used to be on Game Pass. That was a great way to play it, but it's not anymore for now, as of time of recording.
It gets relatively cheap on Steam every once in a while, at the very least.
Yeah, it's like $20 US full price, so I maybe check out a fall holiday sale there. Immortality is a game in the interactive film genre, much like Sam Barlow's previous works. That would be Her Story and Telling Lies. But this game is branded as, quote, an interactive movie trilogy. See, the player begins with one clip available from 3 films, so one clip each in each of these 3 films. And these are films that have been created for the game. But during playback of a clip, the player can rewind, fast forward, and then pause to click on a person or an item of interest. When you make this selection, it jumps the player to a new clip in an attempted match cut. It does this little effect where it zooms in on what you click on and then zooms out in a whole new clip. Often if you're I want to click on an actor and see if, this person is in another scene. That's one easy way to do it. Or you can be there's an apple here. An apple might be important. I'm going to click on this apple. You'll either get another scene with an apple or another fruit. There's some leeway when it comes to that to make sure that you're getting new clips through this process. The game will show you all of the other clips inside the game's database as long as you know how to maneuver it just right, and you'll see all the clips from the game's 3 films. But these clips also show behind-the-scenes production footage. It's not like the film has been edited. These are database clips. So you'll see clips start with a clapper and some conversation beforehand, and you'll see the cut and the actors break and chat a little bit. So it's not, perfectly clean edited clips. You'll also see some different interview clips from like when these actors went on a late night TV talk show, that kind of thing. Basically, this is all you're doing. You're watching these clips, you're maneuvering through the clip, and then clicking on something to then get jumped to a new clip through Match Cut. Sounds complicated, but it's super interesting and super simple, and you just have to pay attention and try to keep everything together. Because the narrative of Immortality involves the fictional model turned actress named Marissa Marcel, who had starred in 3 movies from 1968, 1970, and 1999, but they were all never released. Now Marcel has gone missing, creating a mystery for the player to solve. These films in question include Ambrosio from 1968. It's a late 1700s period piece and an adaptation of Matthew Lewis's actually real and notorious Gothic novel, The Monk, where a Catholic priest is manipulated by a temptress posing as a monk who is played by Marissa. There's Minsky from 1970. It's a film noir piece set in New York City, and it concerns the death of a famous artist, and Marissa stars as the muse suspected of murdering him, as she interacts with the detective assigned to the case. Finally, there's Two of Everything from 1999. It's a subversive thriller where Marissa plays the role of pop star Maria as well as Maria's body double, as the story revolves around Maria being murdered and her body double seeking revenge. The big questions of Immortality. What happened behind the scenes during production as to why all of these films were never released? Why does Marissa Marcel look like she hasn't aged a day in the nearly 30 years between Minsky and Two of Everything? And where is Marissa Marcel? And what happened to her? Joe, here's where I'll ask you, what are our experiences with Immortality?
Hey, this game's weird. This is one of the weirdest games I've ever played in my life. Weird in a very interesting way, but really weird. Like, I genuinely don't think I can name any other experience even remotely close to it, is the thing. So, I don't know. It's gonna be a game that I remember for a long time, pretty much because it is bizarre.
Yeah, you're right. And, because there are comparisons certainly to be made with Sam Barlow's other games. I mean, Her Story and Telling Lies. But with those, you're more focused on what's being said, as you can then type in words to find clips in the database. But those words are based on what's being said in the captions, right? This is exploring cinematography and filmmaking and what is actually in the scene as you find and click on it. As you move your cursor, if it turns into like an eyeball or something like that, that shows you that you're hovering over something that can be clicked on. So it's not every little thing in the scene. There are certainly objects that will kind of jump out just with your natural inquisitiveness. But yeah, the game's really weird, especially when it gets into the spoilers that we will not discuss, because there's a big hook. And you're right, it does turn it into an experience that you will remember, forever, I think, as long as you're playing games. I beat this game in one sitting, which was probably about 5 hours, maybe 6 hours long. That was a long sitting, but I feel like I just couldn't break away. I've heard of some people spending like 9 to 10 hours on it.
That's about where I was.
Okay. So there is that. So you might have to break it up into a few sections, but I don't know, I take notes. Like, you get to a point where it's like, oh, you know what? I would kind of be interested to see if Ambrosio, if Minsky, if Two or Everything, if they were actually movies, I'd kind of want to see it, front to back, see what they made. But there is more to this game than meets the eye. There is mature content in the game.
Yeah.
So
we're talking like full frontal nudity multiple times.
yeah. Also, some sexual assault and violence. So content warnings there for sure. Don't play this in front of your parents. Yes. And it's also just a creepier, spookier game than it lets on. I think it's perfect to talk about here for spooky season. But yeah, game's weird in the best way possible. It was one of my favorites from last year. So the development of Immortality certainly has its wrinkles to it. Go check out the No Clip documentary on it if you want to really see a just really good documentary talking to the actors and to Sam Barlow and really diving into it. It's like more than an hour on the making of this game, but do play the game before you do that because it talks about everything from it. So Barlow had announced Immortality as Project Ambrosio in 2020, and he blogged about its development. And his writing suggested at the time that the game may have more of a horror-themed nature than his previous works. Barlow ended up bringing on 3 additional screenwriters for the game. These would be Alan Scott, Amelia Gray, and Barry Gifford. And I would guess that this would be to help keep everything straight and consistent, especially when you're talking about things being across 3 fictional films. Casting for the game took place over Zoom in early 2021 because, pandemic. It was actress Manon Gage's first role in 3 years since graduating from the Juilliard School. Very prestigious acting school here in the States. Kind of hard to believe that she had not had a role because Manon Gage as Marissa Marcel steals the show.
She's extremely good, but also every time I see her outside of the context of Immortality, it's like a jump scare now.
Yeah. I mean, I really want her to get more acting work, but at the same time, that's a role that if people have played it, like that's going to be a tough first impression to break away from. And honestly, the best way. It's like why people still think of John Krasinski as Jim from the US version of The Office. Like you make such a good first impression. Filming for the 3 film-themed scripts was done chronologically and covered 400 pages. Amazingly, it was shot over a 10-week period in the Arts District, Los Angeles, around August 2021. The game was then revealed at Microsoft's E3 2021 press conference. It premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival in June 2022. It reviewed very well, with a Metacritic average of 87 on PC, 88 on the Xbox Series consoles. It was praised for its acting performances, the attention to detail in the filmmaking, the way that the players can unravel the complex narrative at their own pace and order, and the way that the game subverts its own genre. If anything, critics thought that the game was, quote, so dense in mystery and misdirection that it can often feel impenetrable. Plus, the whole match cut mechanic, while it's very cool, it is more haphazard and kind of plays by its own algorithmic rules, especially compared to searching for a word in the game's script. So you don't really feel as much like a detective as you might in Her Story and Telling Lies.
Yeah, I could see that. I know that I did get to a point near the end where I think it was about the 9th hour where I was like, I'm just going to look up how to get the ending because I can't find it. Because the ending is a hidden ending to find, essentially. And that's what is going to decide how long your playthrough is. How long does it take you to find it?
Yeah, and like Her Story, I think, I haven't played Telling Lies, so I wonder if it's the same thing. If you know how to get there, you could jump ahead pretty quickly, though I think there are some checks and blocks, so you can't like watch the final scene like from the get-go, but you could probably get there pretty quickly. But then that just deprives you of the journey of how you kind of worked your way there.
Yeah, Telling Lies works basically the same as Her Story. Like,
Okay.
it's very much a very, very similar game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think, there's also going to be, time that you'll have to go perusing through these clips a little more than just the initial watch of a clip from Her Story or Telling Lies. If you want to go back to, say, the middle of the clip and find, there was that object that caught my eye, or this actor, I wonder what else they're in throughout these 3 films. Things like that. So you'll have to go back and forth and kind of mix with the tape a little bit, so to speak. There wasn't really any sales information available. I'm going to guess it was pretty niche, but it was an awards nomination darling. The game was nominated for Best Performance by Manon Gage, Best Narrative, and Best Game Direction at the Game Awards. It was nominated for 6 BAFTAs, and it won Best Narrative. And it was nominated for 4 DICE Awards. Basically, a lot of these ones were it was the acting, the story, the direction. Like, those were a lot of the big highlights. Though it was also nominated for Outstanding Original Score for Interactive Media at the Society of Composers and Lyricists Awards. And there's been nothing from Sam Barlow since, so I'm sure he's starting to concoct what his next project might be. But in the meantime, just go play Immortality, and also get Manon Gage more acting work. For the music for Immortality, let's talk about its composer, and this would be Nainita Desai. Nainita Desai was born and raised in London by her Indian parents. Quote, her eclectic musical upbringing led her to study the sitar, piano, guitar, tabla, singing, and violin. She holds a degree in mathematics, and she studied sound design at the National Film and Television School. She seemed to start working in the music industry in 1998, and we mentioned Hackers recently on the show. I thought it was notable that she worked as a sound designer on Hackers, among other films.
Okay. I didn't expect a connection to Jack Move today, but all right.
Yeah, that's right. That's where that came from. In 2016, Nainita was named a BAFTA Breakthrough Brit. She also won a documentary Emmy in 2022 for Best Original Score for a Documentary. She has been on several recent lists of composers to watch for. She sits on the film committee at BAFTA, among other voting and jury appointments for major awards. And you can follow her on Twitter at Nainita Desai, Nainita Desai. So Nainita Desai has only come to compose in the game space in recent years through Sam Barlow, and so she composed on Telling Lies and Immortality. Her website noted upcoming projects, quote, with EA Originals and Activision. Well, that Activision project has been revealed. It was Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 Season 3, which came out this year in 2023. No word on the EA Originals project, though. Should be interesting to keep an eye out for that. She's composed on films like For Sama, The Reason I Jump, American Murder, The Family Next Door, 14 Peaks, Nothing is Impossible, and The Deepest Breath. A lot of these are documentary films. Same thing with the TV series like Catching a Killer, The 1900 Island, Enslaved, The Tower, and Predators. For Immortality's score, it is composed by Nainita Desai, and because the movie clips are found footage, the films and the clips themselves don't have a score. It's not like they've been through post-processing. You're just watching the raw filmed clips. So, Immortality's score is more about what plays when these clips are paused, rewound, etc., and what the player is learning through these clips. And so the game's soundtrack revolves around 3 main themes. They are religion, which plays during Ambrosio clips, life, which plays during Minsky clips, and art, which plays during Two of Everything clips. Now, these main themes could be seen as the light side. Everything's fine and nothing's wrong. It's a pretty normal clip. Then, when a clip has some disturbing elements to it or dark reveals, there's a subverted version of the theme, which is, let's call it, more of the piece's dark side. And then, each version of the theme, both normal and subverted, also has a supernatural version to it. We'll get to hear that. Let's say it involves the big twist. That's all we'll say. So, when it comes to the 5 critical tracks for Immortality, let's start off with the very beginning. This first track here is called Immortality Opening. Joe, I know when we talked about covering this game eventually on the show, we were having the conversation of like, how are we going to put a Critical 5 together? It sounds difficult. So you'll have to let me know if any of these clips jump out to you, because this was one right away that got me. And was like, oh, yeah, sure. For the opening theme here, of course, all these composed by Nainita Desai. This is the title splash right at the beginning, as you're kind of being introduced in a way to the world of immortality, and you're diving into this journey. And these haunting, echoing pianos are just so perfect for like setting that kind of spooky vibe. And then you get the violins that come in, one kind of being like grinding a little bit, that high-pitched whine that kind of just sets you on edge a little bit. But then, yeah, the plucking of the strings. This does such a good job with like setting the tone of you're discovering this database, much like you do for all Sam Barlow games. But there's something a little weirder and darker about this one. There's more of a mystery to it that needs to be uncovered. And for this to play right at the start, I think sets that tone flawlessly.
Yeah, I would agree. There's a different version of this song later that I think might be my favorite song in the game, but this is definitely a pretty good introduction of the tone that you're about to get with good old Immortality here.
So let's get to one of these 3 main themes, and we're going to start with it subverted, because I think that's an interesting way to start. My favorite of the 3 films happens to be Minsky, and so we're going to put this theme first. Critical track number 2. This is Life Subverted. Life is a pretty nice piece straight up. Its normal version is a little more jazzy and cool, but I think why we're highlighting the subverted version here first is, one, if we're going to talk about one normal theme, It's coming up here at the next track, and there has to be one to talk about with this game. But I think it's really cool to kind of dive into this idea of like the dark side of the piece, because a lot goes wrong in these clips. And so you're probably going to be hearing the subverted theme quite a lot. Again, Life is from Minsky, the film noir film. And the regular version, Nainita Desai says, quote, "And so the music has this sense of abandonment, where we revel in beauty and we get wrapped up in hedonistic activity. But for the dark side, quote, imagine if you've been to a party and you're enjoying the party, that's the theme of life. And then you wake up the next morning and you've got a hangover. What kind of emotion would that evoke?" She also says, "It's dark, it's orchestral, and there's this cold emptiness behind the sensual facade of the main theme. I really enjoyed writing that one, and using the saxophone. I've always wanted to use the sax in a score, and it's not very often that you get the opportunity to use it." You kind of hear the saxophone lightly at the end of the clip there. It's right at the beginning of the piece, but yeah, nice to hear that instrument used in there. I'm a big sucker for the saxophone. Played that growing up myself, though it's more of a tenor sax in this one. Even still, it kind of sets that jazzy, film noir, smoky kind of vibe that this New York City set film is trying to evoke. And yeah, perfect for Minsky.
Yeah, I think I agree that Minsky is probably my favorite overall as well. The secondary actor in that one adds a lot when Man Gage gets to play off of him for a ton of it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it jumps out at me, but also everybody should get to use the sax more often. The sax is a really, really good instrument, and we don't hear it in games enough. So do more.
Absolutely. I'm all for that. It's so good. Whether it's like a synthesized sax or a real performance, get that jazzy sound in there. If there's one piece that I feel like gets highlighted as like the main theme of Immortality, or it gets used in like trailers or documentaries or something like that, the big one I'd say is critical track number 3. And this one is called Art. Definitely my favorite musical theme in the game, and it's the normal theme for the Two of Everything clips. Just a great piano in the background, these little string runs with the da-da-da, da-da-da. It really, really stands out, and especially when you're in the Two of Everything clips, like you're starting to piece together and like trying to find that ending. And so not only is it a theme that really catches your ear and stands out with you, but I feel like it's also tied to, I'm just trying to get to the end, man. Nainita Desai has a couple quotes where she says, quote, "In the main theme, we're trying to evoke the magic of creating something artistic that will last forever. It's about the magic of creative inspiration. And when you get going, there's an energy to it because you can't stop creating." But she says, quote, "The subverted version is that of the dark side of being artistic, where it's torturous and exhausting. You're trying to finish your work, and artists find it really troublesome and struggle to achieve perfection in art that you can never really achieve. It's about the hard graft of creating art." So I kind of get the impression in a way, like with the normal theme here, that it's almost like going through a museum and recognizing like all the beauty that's there. But certainly when it comes to the creation of said art, there's the positive spin on it as well.
I would agree that this is probably the most memorable of all of them for me as well. And the strings are a big part of it. I don't really know what else to say other than this is a close second place for my favorite piece on the soundtrack.
Interesting. We will get there. And maybe it will be critical track number 4 because as the game wraps up, you have a theme called Immortality Closing. The piece kind of opens the same way for that main Immortality theme with those haunting pianos, but as you learn the truth about the ending of the game and what happened to Marissa Marcel, you get this very dark, heavy piece, like the choirs coming in, like the brass hits that just kind of jabs at you in a way. What an orchestration here that really just kind of hits you with the gravity of everything that you've discovered. Joe, I think to try to dance around spoilers and all that, I think the one thing I took away from the ending of the game is this game did such a good job of making you feel like an active part. Like, this game couldn't have been a film or anything like that. Like, it has to be a video game because it requires the brain power and active participation of the player trying to solve the mystery. And I think once it all kind of comes together, especially in the big final moment before credits, this music accompanying it is something special.
Yeah, this is my favorite song of the game because of that moment and the way everything sort of closes out, I guess you could say. It's just cool. I really, really like this piece, and I really like that moment, and I think this fits incredibly well, and I just really also love the strings and the weird vocals. Those add a lot.
It sure does. It sure does. And yet, the musical moment that sticks with me the most from this game knew that it had to be in the Critical 5 with the bullet, even though it's not important, but come on. Critical track number 5 for Immortality. This is Two of Everything.
You and me forevermore. Baby, that scares me. Can we just be you and me? Everything comes in pairs. Me and you and me got two of everything. Two hands, two eyes, got two of everything. Too much of everything.
So when the Two of Everything film features a pop star and her body double, and it's set in the late 90s, being filmed during that time, what was popular during pop music at the time? It was solo female artists and, of course, boy bands, but this does the perfect job of channeling what a pop song from a solo female artist was like at the time, like a Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, Jessica Simpson, Mandy Moore, what have you. Granted, I'm naming American examples, but you get the gist, and especially if you're of a certain age where you remember that kind of music, like maybe this transported you right back there. But this poppy song that is included in the third film shows up in its full at the end of the credits, and it's just amazing. I'm so glad they included it, and it's part of the soundtrack, so of course it has to be here. Vocals are by Tori Beaumont, and she does a great job of capturing that energy of a pop song for the time period.
This is the most late 90s. Like, they nailed writing a late 90s. I don't know. It feels a little bit more like what you would have heard in like family-friendly movies back then, but Two of Everything obviously is not that. It starts out as kind of that, but it's not that.
Yeah.
But like, this is what music sounded like in things back in the 90s, kiddos, and early 2000s as well, honestly. Yeah, they nailed that. It's perfect.
Perfect. No notes. Here for it. We are old. For tracks on the cutting room floor, let's get to a couple. I mean, we've talked about life. We've talked about art. Let's get to the other main theme of the game for Ambrosio. This is called Religion. The harps, the strings, the vocals, it's all so good. And it's the main theme for Ambrosio. Nainita Desai says, quote, "So this music has to describe the divine and the spiritual power of the characters. It's slightly fantastical and it's got a little bit of sprinkling of magic in there. So you've got this idea of rapture and miracle and awe in the music. Its eventual subversion, quote, represents the negative aspects of religion, the idea of control, controlling people, and inflicting cruelty on people. Kind of the dark side that comes out with religion." And for a novel that was all about, the sex in religion, these temptresses wooing the priests, for it being a big deal with the monk at the time in the late 1700s that the novel was made. But for a period piece to kind of try to channel that all again, what a place to start. And it gives you some interesting starting points. I know I kind of explored more of Ambrosio first, and I feel like the game kind of wants you to do that. It may push you in that direction, but a lot of interesting threads to follow up on in its clips there for Ambrosio.
Yeah, this certainly sounds a lot different from the other tracks, because Ambrosio is honestly way different from the other movies.
It's like trying to put on a Shakespeare play versus like a thriller from the 90s.
Yeah, like it's both of the other films are like contemporary. They take place in what is then modern day, but Ambrosio honestly does not. It does not take place in the 60s. I can tell you that for sure. And I think giving it a completely different feel works to sort of convey that.
I kind of like how it sounds a little bit. The music sounds like it's from the Horizon franchise a little bit. Like the instrumentation here kind of gives me that impression, which is kind of interesting with that game. Like, yeah, you have some technology, but it's draped in a lot of like post-apocalyptic, like people being in tribes, kind of things like that, going back to the roots of humanity there. So just interesting musical note to point out there. As things get supernatural, here comes the horror. And the other track here on the cutting room floor, this is Life, Supernatural. The winding strings, the dissonance, the electrical noises, like the cuts and jumps, like this is deeply unpleasant to listen to, but there's a good reason for that. And so this supernatural version is spinning off the normal theme of life, so you'd be discovering this in the Minsky clips. Nainita Desai says, quote, "Every now and again, when you hit upon something, you switch into listening to the supernatural theme, which is the same as the main theme, but you flip it and it becomes inverted and becomes all twisted and mangled and really creepy and eerie. She says, I kept the recordings of the main themes, and then I had to do a lot of electronic manipulation to them and make them sound slowed down and warped. We were really influenced by David Lynch. And that Twin Peaks director is a good way to kind of go down that path. I feel like for a lot of the themes, things are pretty normal, but as you discover with the big hook of the game, supernatural is right. The game is called Immortality, and you've got some deeply unsettling music here, my friend.
Deeply unsettling is correct. I think the strings aren't just like warped and winding. I'm pretty sure they might also be reversed, or at least they sound like they are.
Probably, yeah.
But like, I genuinely, yeah, it's unpleasant to listen to, but in the context that it lives in, I love this piece. It's fantastic.
Yes, incredible in context for sure. And like that's the hard thing, right? Like someone may be listening to this and be like, God, just skip forward 15, 30 seconds. Like, you got to trust us in game. Mwah, chef's kiss. So good. What will I never forget about Immortality? I can say 2 words that are technically spoilers, but again, if you don't know what I'm talking about, it won't mean anything to you. If you have played it, you'll know. Joe, it's the one. That will stick with me for a very long time. And I think it will for you too. But honestly, this game is perfect for spooky season. I'm glad it drops here. And if you love films, if you love filmmaking, if you love just watching movies, this game is a must play. Like, why haven't you played Immortality yet? If you love everything that goes into cinema, this is, you got to play it. And for me, like going to film school, I ate this up. Obviously, I played it in such a long stint. This was so up my alley. And I think if you love movies, it will be for you too.
So I have a question, and I'm going to keep it as vague as possible, obviously. How long did it take you to find it?
It took me about an hour.
I'd say I think I'm the same. Was it completely on accident, like I assume it is for most people?
So, in a way, I will say as a note, again, if you're thinking about playing this game, play it with a controller that has good rumble mechanics. I think something is lost and you'll be a little more slow on the uptake than if you have a controller rumbling.
I mean, to be fair, that's probably why it took me 9 hours. I played with a mouse and keyboard.
Oh, yeah. And so that's going to be a tougher learning curve for you there playing this game. But yeah, get the rumbling for sure. I also had my speakers on in the room pretty loud. So when there was some audio dissonance as well, something was off and it's like, oh, okay, maybe investigate that further. So yeah, I think that's about what we'll say in terms of that. Important tips for playing that there. All right, so to transition to our next game, we like to highlight a fan cover, a fan remix, wherever it is, YouTube, OC Remix, wherever. I was hoping that someone did a cover of Two of Everything. Oh, I would have really loved to hear that pop song get covered. Alas, not the case. Didn't really find anything for Immortality. So we're going to highlight the end credits theme, which plays before that Two of Everything pop song comes in. And it still gives great vibes as you're kind of just reeling from the ending of Immortality. Please enjoy, and we'll be right back.
All right, let's go back 30 whole years, possibly 30 whole years to the day. I don't know, because the only thing Wikipedia tells me is that this game came out in 1992 and does not give me an exact date. So I guess we don't know? So Yeah, Alone in the Dark, released for MS-DOS in 1992. It's weird that we don't know. I mean, I remember that we've talked about some like arcade titles that we don't know the exact date they released, but it's weird that this one is one that I don't have an exact date for.
I mean, just a different era, and then you'd get, magazines talking about it, but yeah, just a different time.
And then from there, it would go on to release on the 3DO, Mac OS, which back then was even more different from like DOS than it is now. The PC-98, FM Towns, which I've never heard of. It's apparently a Japanese PC from back in the day. And eventually, iOS, just out of nowhere. That's the last one listed. Alone in the Dark was developed by Infogrames and published by Infogrames in Europe, but then Interplay published it in North America, and I believe now THQ Nordic owns the IP, unfortunately. But that is neither here nor there. What is Alone in the Dark? It is a survival horror adventure game where the player can take control of one of two characters, Edward Carnby or Emily Hartwood. The game is built very heavily around exploration and puzzle solving, but there's also combat, where you can either have your character use their fists and feet, or they can have a weapon to fight with. There are monsters that will attack you, and sometimes you need to attack them back, but it should be noted, not all enemies in the game can be killed. Sometimes you just need to run away. Much like your usual adventure game, like you have a limited amount of inventory space. That's just a usual thing. Except, and this I did not know, instead of having a limited number of slots for items, is instead decided how many items you can hold by the item's weight. So if you have too much stuff that weighs too much, too bad, you're not picking up that item. Luckily, if you do need to like empty your pockets to pick up something especially heavy, those items then stay on the ground where you dropped them, and they are consistent. So even when you leave the room, they stay there, and you can go back and get them later.
Oh, that's kind of a big deal for the time. That's really clever.
Mm-hmm. Items are, of course, used to solve puzzles. You can open up new areas of the mansion. From what I understand, the first bit of the mansion, the first two areas are very linear, and then after that, it opens up the rest of the mansion to explore freely as you go. The plot of Alone in the Dark. In 1924 Louisiana, a famous artist by the name of Jeremy Hartwood mysteriously commits suicide. While the circumstances of his death appear suspicious, nobody in town is actually surprised it happened. Hartwood was the owner of a mansion known as Deserto, which has long been thought to be haunted by an evil presence. The story can follow either Edward Carnby, a private investigator who has been hired to find an antique piano somewhere in the mansion, or Emily Hartwood, Jeremy's niece, who believes that same antique piano may contain a note explaining his suicide. Once either character enters the mansion, the door slams shut and locks behind them, and they soon find themselves being attacked by monsters. So, they have to find the piano, survive the monsters, learn the mysterious history of Deserto, and find a way to leave the mansion once and for all. So here's where I will ask, what are our experiences with Alone in the Dark?
Alone in the Dark, certainly a game that is foundational in the survival horror genre. Not a genre that's usually been up my alley, so there's been no need for me to go back and play it, but you can see a lot of the foundations kind of there. Unfortunately, I feel like in the years past and since, in the last 30 years, attempts to try to modernize it or use the IP in unique ways have fallen more than flat, just fallen badly.
Boy, will we get one of them I didn't know existed. Will we get to that?
Yeah, so if anything, like my knowledge of it growing up, as someone who didn't really play games like that in the early 90s. Like when your brush with it is like, oh, there's a game called Alone in the Dark on the Xbox 360. Oh, and it ties back to this classic franchise. It's just not a good scene. Like, just don't go there. So yeah, a classic for sure. And we'll get to its more recent past and also its future. But yeah, a stone cold classic for sure, especially for survival horror fans. Never played it though. Don't know its music.
Yeah, it's super classic, super influential. Like one of those, probably up there with Street Fighter 2.
Up there with like Monkey Island too. Long with like the influence of point and click adventure kind of games. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And also it was a 3D exploration game, which at that time was basically unheard of back in 92. So kind of cool there as well. And I've never played it either. I can't really say that I have a huge desire to, personally. I respect it. It does not look like a game I would enjoy elbowing through the jank.
And this is someone who has gone back and played Clock Tower.
Yes, exactly. I've played Clock Tower. I've played the original Silent Hill. This is a little too far back, and I'm good. But in terms of like the history of this game's development, it's really, really neat. And I figured it would be neat because, again, one of the first games of its kind, influenced a bunch of games we know today, turned into a trash fire as the years went by. And it's just cool. Shout out to the GDC Vault on YouTube, where Frederick Reynal, the director/programmer of Alone in the Dark, did a full like retro post-mortem, which are
neat.
Super cool. GDC has those a lot of the time. But also a secondary shout out to GameDev.org, who wrote down what he said because he has a very thick French accent, and I was unfortunately having trouble understanding some of the things he said, but somebody else didn't and was able to get the information down there. So both of those things are where a majority of this information comes from. So a good amount of the game's tone was actually inspired by Reynal's time working at his father's VHS rental shop, which he worked at regularly. And he watched films whenever he wasn't programming. So it was his life, according to him, was basically working at the rental shop, programming. Working at the rental shop, watching movies, programming. And that was just what he did forever. And that eventually did get him a job at Infogrames, obviously. And he was especially fond of a lot of 70s horror films, like ones that he put up on his PowerPoint presentation were Dawn of the Dead, The Evil Dead, The Amityville Horror, and he really, really looked up to directors like George Romero and Dario Argento, which is the second damn time he's been mentioned on this show. Which is 2 more than I expected, honestly. And he also, in his presentation, makes special mention of Amityville's poster quote as being a big inspiration for the main goal of Alone in the Dark, being, "For God's sake, get out." So I found that amusing. And one of his first jobs working at Infogrames was, God, why did they have to have the most difficult name to say on the planet?
I know. It's not Infogames. It's Infogrames.
And my brain also sometimes wants to say Infrogrames, but that's not it either. But after joining Infogrames, his first project there was he was porting a very early 3D platformer called The Cube. And he apparently got very deep into this work on The Cube, to the point where he said he became obsessed with The Cube and describes it as being surrounded by The Cube. And I lost him at that point, but then he got me back when he talked about how this kind of pushed him to the idea of a 3D environment that the player could explore with a 3D character. And, of course, his history with horror then came into play as well. The alone part of the game's concept actually comes from the fact that, hey, you can only put so many characters on screen at a time with the technology back then. The amount usually being maybe 2.
Mm-hmm.
And dialogue wasn't exactly something that you could really throw in there a lot, like spoken dialogue. So they needed to avoid both of those things. The choice for the game to take place in the 1920s was because it was a modern era before electronics, but that still had electric lighting. So honestly, he could have done anything from the 30s to the... I guess the 20s worked the best because then you still have the old style cars, because once you hit the 50s, cars start looking like cars look now.
True.
Would be something in there, I suppose. And also, there's that whole depression and then the war thing that happens in the 2 decades after the 20s. He just wanted to make sure that there was no electronics that were going to mess with the story, and also so that all the weapons could just be straightforward things. You pick up a gun, it's a gun. It just shoots one bullet. You pick up a stick, you're hitting things with it. There's no AK-47 or anything like that. And also he knew very early that the game was going to need a lot of text if they were going to actually build a scary narrative. Because even then, they knew that the polygonal monsters they made weren't going to be very frightening. I don't know if you've ever seen the monsters in Alone in the Dark. They look very goofy. Extremely low poly, really funny looking. So even then they looked at those monsters and were like, this isn't scary. We're going to need to do something else.
I've got a 1 hour playthrough pulled up because I haven't really seen this. Oh my God. This is really impressive for the time.
For 92? Absolutely.
It's kind of incredible when you look at it. What are some of these monsters? Oh, yeah, It's kind of a zombie alien character that, okay, yeah, they did their best, but it is a little comical.
Yeah, they did the absolute best they could with the technology they had at the time. It's just, unfortunately, the technology they had at the time only allowed them to make Halloween monsters, essentially. Reynal originally wanted the game's environments to be textured using photographs of a real mansion. But then, again, the tech it wasn't there. They couldn't do it. So he gave up on that idea, and the backgrounds ended up being hand-drawn bitmaps instead. But also, because they wanted to mix the polygonal character models with pre-rendered backgrounds, the game then had to use fixed camera angles in order to be able to show everything. That might sound familiar. We'll get to it. And when Reynal first pitched the game to Infogrames, they actually turned him down because they did not think that it would be possible to make. And so from there, he got dumped on completing the French port of SimCity, but he was not discouraged. He was going to pursue this horror project. He wanted to make it happen. So in their own time, they finally got all the pieces in place, and they managed to put together this little proof of concept. Just a couple of rooms, move around with the main character, etc., etc. And when they were able to show Infogrames that, then they finally approved the project. Emily Hartwood, this is a very 90s gaming thing, was added as a playable character because at the time, the belief was that if they put Emily Hartwood in the game, more women will play the game. Which, I mean, hey, props for representation. That's an unfortunate reason in retrospect to put the character in the game.
Yep.
But at least she's there, I guess. The game's Lovecraftian influences, which that's 2 games in a row with Lovecraft stuff. That was not on purpose, by the way. I did not know there was Lovecraft stuff in Alone in the Dark until I did this research.
But, 'tis the season.
Yeah, Lovecraft is kind of all over the place when you look at horror stuff. But the reason that they're there in Alone in the Dark is because Infogrames had recently just obtained the rights to adapt Call of Cthulhu, the tabletop game.
Oh, okay.
And so they put that kind of thing in, and then they made a Call of Cthulhu game. Apparently, Reynal, when talking about it, when Call of Cthulhu was brought up to him, his immediate response was, "But I don't want to adapt the tabletop game because the character sheets are awful." So the game is also very heavily inspired by Edgar Allan Poe's The Fall of the House of Usher. And Edward Carnby is apparently named after a character named John Carnby, the main character of a short story known as The Return of the Sorcerer. Other possible titles that Alone in the Dark could have had: In the Dark, Screams in the Dark, The Old Dark House, The Thing in the House, The Evil Fear. That is my favorite one, that last one.
I love when we learn about these. What could it have been? It's one of my favorite things that we stumble upon in the research.
I think they picked the right one, but I could see The Old Dark House being a pretty alright title for this.
The Evil Fear is a winner, though.
The Evil Fear is pretty good. The game ran into some issues near the end of development, though. Most of it, as Reynal describes it, was a very optimistic process. Everybody was really gung-ho to work on this project. They really loved doing it. And then bug testing started.
Yep.
And boy, howdy, this apparently really began to wear on the team. And Reynal was actually starting to get super dissatisfied with the entire product. And he was convinced that when they put it out, players were just going to immediately notice all of the game's flaws. It was going to get written off. It was going to get thrown in the trash. And then, while all this was happening, he got another punch to the gut, because he was then asked by the president of Infogrames to replace the game created by Frederick Reynal, quote in the credits, with game created by Infogrames. And he complied, but he was not happy about it. He felt like his credit was kind of being stripped away from him in that way, which it kind of was. And after the game's success, because of this, they actually went to Reynal and said, "Hey, we want you to make a sequel, but you have to use the same engine." And he was very unhappy with this restriction, and very shortly after, he and the rest of the team that made the game left Infogrames. They did not work on Alone in the Dark 2. Now, luckily, the doom and gloom feeling about releasing the game and having players only see the flaws didn't come true, because the game reviewed extremely positively upon release, pretty much immediately being seen as a revolutionary step in the genre. There were some pieces of criticism, such as the fact that it's kind of never really clear which enemies you can kill and which you cannot, and certain things in the environment can just kill you without warning.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So that was a sticking point for some people. Again, the monsters also look really goofy, but I feel like for at least that one, like we were saying, you can give it a pass. It was 1992. They did the best they could. The other two things needed some work and could have been fixed in that time, but retrospect, you know? By January 2000, the game had sold 2.5 million copies. So it did quite well, especially for the time. It won awards at the European Computer Trade Show, including Best Graphics, Most Original Game, and Best French Game of the Year. And then it won Best Foreign Game at the Consumer Electronics Show. Nowadays, you'll probably find it on a lot of lists of the best or most influential games ever made. Because again, it is. And it spawned a whole franchise, and it was downhill from there. So Alone in the Dark 2 released in 1993, then Alone in the Dark 3 released in 1994. The series was then rebooted in May of 2001 with the release of Alone in the Dark: The New Nightmare for PS1, PS2, Dreamcast, PC, and Game Boy Color, which you can actually play that version on Nintendo Switch Online now.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Though based on reviews, it is not very good. So you probably don't want to. Its game ranking score was quite a bit under the other versions of the game. And then the series ran into what we can charitably call some troubles. In 2008, they rebooted the series again, this time releasing a game simply titled Alone in the Dark, and it came out for PC, PS2, Wii, Xbox, and PS3, and boy howdy, it was not received well at all. And I actually didn't know this part. I should have, but I didn't. It was the center of some drama where when the negative reviews of the game came out, Atari threatened to sue the review outlets that were putting out negative reviews, claiming that they must have illegally obtained pre-launch copies of the game. There was no way they could have a copy of the game in time to do a launch day release, to which they fired back, "No, you sent us copies of the game. We reviewed a legal copy," which then led Atari to claim that, quote, "they only let high-scoring reviews break the post-release embargo date." Note, as somebody that has worked with review embargoes in the past, that's not how it works. You can't just say, oh, you can only release yours before launch if you liked it.
Genuinely an insane story. Did not know that.
Atari obviously never actually sued anybody, and most of those reviews are still up to this day. Then in 2015, I didn't know this game existed. Atari released another reboot. This time it was a 4-player co-op third-person shooter called Alone in the Dark Illumination. It was received very poorly. Its Metacritic score is 19.
How do you get a Metacritic of 19?
That might be the lowest Metacritic score we have ever talked about on this show, I think.
Insanity.
So from there, the series, unsurprisingly, died. But now there is a new entry that is set to release in January of 2024. It is being billed as a reimagining of the original game. It returns to Emily Hartwood and Edward Carnby exploring Deserto, but now Carnby is being played by Stranger Things' David Harbour.
Oh, that's fantastic. Good casting.
And also, the game has been shown to Reynal, who has given it his blessing and said, no, they've got it. They nailed it.
Oh, love that.
So hopefully it is good. Not a big fan of the publisher, but the game, there's a prologue, like a free prologue you can play on Steam right now. I haven't played it. I was only sort of vaguely interested in it at first, because first of all, I was talking about it this year because it was supposed to come out in 2 weeks on October 25th, and then got delayed like, what, a week ago? 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, that's true. Oh, Jodie Comer is playing Emily.
Yes,
oh,
she is.
Wow, okay.
So it's got a good cast, and hopefully it is good. I have high hopes for it now, because after looking into it, I found out it's being written by Mikhail Hedberg, whom we have talked about on this show because he wrote Amnesia: The Dark Descent, and, more importantly, he wrote Soma. So that knowledge has upped my interest in the game demonstrably. Also, Alone in the Dark inspired 2 films, and of course the first one was Uwe Boll. I feel like that's all I need to say.
Sure, yep.
And once again, Alone in the Dark is heavily credited with creating the survival horror genre. Shinji Mikami, the creator of Resident Evil, says that Alone in the Dark's use of fixed camera angles is actually what inspired his team to do the same when they made Resident Evil. And according to Mikami, if Alone in the Dark had not existed and he had not found it, Resident Evil probably would have just ended up being a first-person shooter. Which is super funny because the upcoming reimagining of Alone in the Dark was actually inspired by the success of the Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes. So we have come full circle. So the composer for the original Alone in the Dark is a man by the name of Philippe Vachey, He was born January 7th, 1964, in Lyon, France. He was apparently the in-house composer at Infogrames at the time. And that's pretty much all I could find. I found a Twitter account, but it has 4 tweets in total and has not been used since 2021. But if you really want to follow it, it's at Philippe Vachey, PhilippeVachey. Don't know why you would want to follow it. Again, he hasn't tweeted on it in 2 years, but you do you, I guess. In terms of his discography, as far as I could tell, Alone in the Dark is one of his first music credits. He also did the music for Call of Cthulhu, Shadow of the Comet, Relentless, Twin Sen's Adventure, Time Commando, Twin Sen's Odyssey, Toy Commander, Toy Racer, Moto Racer Advance, and Nikopol Secrets of the Immortals was basically the last credit I could find for him, whether it be on Moby Games or VGMDB or basically anywhere. All of those games I've never heard of, except for Alone in the Dark. In terms of historical development research, I did find one little bit on the Wikipedia page that I found really neat. So, according to Wikipedia, quote, upon Reynolds' request, Vachey also created musical compositions that corresponded to each of the game's many monsters. And while Reynolds intended these tracks to only play whenever a monster appeared on screen, Vachey proposed that they occasionally play even when an enemy was absent. This, Vachey reasoned, would scare the player into thinking they were in danger when they were otherwise perfectly safe. Which feels very similar to how Akira Yamaoka would do the soundtrack to Silent Hill many years later. So it might have influenced that as well.
Yeah, I feel like that'd be very effective on me. Like, where is it? Where is it? And it's just the soundtrack messing with you.
It's a very good idea, and I feel like I've seen a good amount of other horror games play into that as well. Silent Hill, especially, like I said, I'm pretty sure there are rooms in the original Silent Hill where you walk in and, like, encounter music starts playing, and there's nothing in that room. All right. Now, it should be noted, I don't think this game's soundtrack ever got an official release, because I can't find it anywhere. All the sources I found were, I don't know, not labeled or anything, so I found a YouTube video that put what seems to be the whole soundtrack together. A rip from the game, obviously, because you're not going to find an official version of any of these songs. So that's where this is coming from. That's where these titles are coming from. I don't know where they got the titles, but that's just... Finding this soundtrack was harder than you'd think. So we're just gonna ride the wave, I guess. And we're going to start with critical track number 1. This is Entering Deserto as Carnby. So, as I would guess, I don't know where any of these play, by the way, just so people know. I meant to watch a long play. Like you said earlier, it's only like an hour long, but I didn't get around to it, unfortunately. But as I can guess from the titles, there are different songs for both Carnby and Hartwood's intros when they enter the mansion, as might be assumed from the titles. This one I don't like as much as the next one that we will talk about, but I think this is... Boy howdy, is this a 1992 PC game. The sounds are very, very much what one would expect, but I think they still do a great job of sort of bringing across that you are walking into this big, spooky, scary mansion with its harpsichord and its strings and all that. I think it does a very good job at bringing across that sort of atmosphere and feeling.
Yeah, the instruments sound a lot better than some of the game console counterparts, let's just say, those at home. And granted, for this being like a CD version of the soundtrack, yeah, really good instruments for the time. Of course, yeah, the plucked strings is like a must, especially as you're like trying to encroach into this space and like, ooh, what's going on? Blum, 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 blum. Like it's just, yeah, that's a really good tone setter for sure.
So then what does it sound like when you enter Deserto as Miss Hartwood? Well, that's answered in critical track number 2, entering Deserto as Miss Hartwood. I think Miss Hartwood gets the better introduction piece, honestly. It sounds a lot more sinister in a very different way from Carnby, because Carnby's just there to do his job, I guess. So I guess that makes sense. You can hear similarities in both songs, but I think Hartwood, her intro has a bit better of like a tone, in my opinion. I don't know what exactly makes me like it better, but that's where we are.
Yeah, there's some subtle instrument differences for sure. Like Carnby has like a higher violin string melody kind of going through it. And it kind of, I feel like maybe gives it a little more confidence. Whereas, yeah, if you're just, Emily Hartwood, you're just a random Joe Schmo, essentially, just a random citizen. Like you got nothing. At least with a private investigator, you may have some, competence. But I agree. I think it has like a little spookier feeling, a little more sinister, and that fits with not saying they go, oh, because she's a girl. No, like she's more of,
she's a civilian,
an everyday person. Yeah, exactly.
So then, after you have walked into the mansion, the game, of course, begins proper, and I assume this is what plays when you're going around the mansion, which is critical track number 3, Walking About Deserto. This is definitely sort of cheesy horror music, I think. Would that be a xylophone? I'm gonna assume that's
something like that, like a vibraphone. Yeah.
Yeah. But I do think it does a good job for at the time, like kind of given this creepy atmosphere with obviously the organ. You gotta have the organ. That's important.
Yes. Yes.
Without the organ, is it really even a horror game soundtrack? But I think it does a great job of, it still sounds a little goofy at the time, but, I think it does its job overall with giving you this good sort of vibe while you explore this very evil, haunted mansion.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, like a little silly at the top with doom, 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 but like, yeah, setting the right tones with the strings, with the organ. So it kind of fits. Like you're kind of plodding along, not really knowing what you're doing while there is that kind of spooky backdrop. Okay, it checks out. Yeah, it's, again, like you're trying to establish something that hasn't really been done before. And how do you do that musically?
But then eventually you do end your adventure in the adventure game. And that's when you will hear the first of the 2 ending tracks that I have on here. Critical track number 4 is Deserto Collapses. So I think I did get a sort of an idea of where this plays. It is not like the mansion itself collapsing. There are a bunch of caves underneath the mansion, and you find some stuff down there that is relevant to the mystery. And once you have rid the world of said thing, those caves start collapsing, and you have to get out of the caves. And this song, I think, does a very good job of, bringing across the very simple vibe of, hey, it's time to go. Here we go. And the fact that you have to move fast, because if you do not move fast, you are going to die in a cave-in, which sounds horrifying on its own.
Great job setting the tone for, exactly what this is. Also, big shout outs to the sound design, the effects that are kind of going on mixed in with this song, along with the instrumentation that, haven't really heard in the other pieces. This one's cool. And yes, that's the get out now tone so well.
I also just really like the percussion. It feels like it. I don't know if it actually is. I mean, it is, obviously, I could tell, but it just panning with every hit. That also, I didn't expect that from a game in 1992, but it does its job very well, honestly.
And just the heaviness of it to match rocks falling with the cave in. Yeah, that's real cool.
Mm-hmm. And of course, at the very end of everything, you have critical track number 5. End of the game. ... You win! The evil is defeated. This is an early 90s credits song just distilled into a song.
Oh, yeah. See, I was like, okay, yeah, the birds chirping is one thing. Okay, yes, a good positive resolution in orchestra. Okay. And then here comes the 90s pop.
Yeah, it is so... I feel like you could put this in a film from anywhere before 1995. At the credits, and I would not bat an eye. It is so perfect, and so of its era. I mean, it's got a nice happy tone, though. Like I said, the evil is defeated, and it has a lot different of a instrumentation once again, because obviously having spooky organs and xylophones and strings isn't going to work here anymore. The evil is defeated. I don't know. I think it's kind of goofy, but I also think it has its charms, and that's why it's here.
You know what? Chalk it up for another theme. Perfect, timely, 90s inspired end credit themes.
Well, can you really say it's 90s inspired when it was written in the 90s?
Sure you can. Yeah. Yeah, it's modern inspired for the time. Yeah.
My tracks on the cutting room floor. Apparently there are some classical pieces that play on record players throughout the house or something. I don't actually know where they play, but they're in the game, so I guess that's the best place I can go for a cutting room floor track. The first being The Blue Danube. If you don't think you've heard this song, yes, you have. You've heard this song.
La 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 la, click click on Nick.
Probably one of the most recognizable classical pieces in the world. Up there at least with Fur Elise and stuff like that. I don't know what else to say. It's by Johann Strauss, and I don't know if we'll ever... Is it in the Fantasia stage in Kingdom Hearts 3D? That's the only other place I can imagine we possibly would have brought this song up. I don't think it is. So, here it is.
Yeah, I don't know. It's the waltz to end all waltzes. So there you go. There's your 3/4 time. Yeah, when else are we going to bring it up on the show? I think Cutting Room Floor is a perfect place for a classical classic. But, you know, the kind of instrumentation and like how it's being filtered on this version, like it sounds a little different than you've heard it before. But yeah, the melody, you have heard it before. I mean, come on.
Yeah. And the other track on the Cutting Room Floor is, again, another classical piece of music. This is La Danse Macabre. Okay, so this one might not be as recognizable as the Blue Danube. I'll give you that. But I think this is just a really cool classical piece in general. It is among my favorites because it's just fun and it fits in this game so well. Oh man, what a perfect choice. I don't know. I wanted to give a shout out here. Again, when else are we going to talk about it? It was composed by Saint Saëns, I believe is how you pronounce it. I don't remember. I used to know. But, yeah, just in general, like, what a perfect song to include on this soundtrack. And it's super fun. It's one of those songs where, like, man, if I could learn how to play something on piano, I would play the piano part of this song in a heartbeat.
Yeah, the title obviously fits. There's a kind of weird whimsy to it. You're right, the piano part does shine in this simplified orchestration passed through a record filter. But again, good to bring a classic like this. Yeah, the Cutting Room Floor, not composed by Philippe Vachey, but, good to include for sure.
This game does not have a massive soundtrack, being a DOS game in 1992.
Oh, so of course, yeah.
That was basically the only avenue I had at that point, which, hey, not a bad problem to have when you can talk about the Blue Danube. I don't know why I enjoy saying that so much, but here we are. So what will I never forget about Alone in the Dark? Just the influence this game has had over the years. Like, I'm pretty sure Resident Evil would not exist without it, which means Silent Hill would not exist without it, which means a bunch of horror games would not exist without it in the state they are now. So obviously it's just this influence throughout the years. Now that I know the guy who wrote Soma wrote the new game, I am far more interested in it. Like, yeah, David Harbour and Jodie Comer, they're fine. That's fine. I like both of them. David Harbour especially. No, it was the writer of Soma is what got me. I'm in, maybe, probably.
Yeah, I think for me, now I kind of have some interest in that remake, especially if it's trying to, remake the original story. That's pretty cool. I feel like I didn't know too much about the original game here, especially not soundtrack, but knew how influential it was. Just kind of nice to learn more about it. So obviously a great game to bring during October spooky season. And I think it works super well. So thank you for bringing it.
Yeah, I'm glad to have learned more about this game. Because before this, I knew what it looked like. And I knew that it existed. And I knew it was influential. And that's where my information stopped.
Well, certainly influential games in their respective genres with Immortality and Alone in the Dark. Also those perfect 90s end credits theme, but that's a whole other thing. All right, that'll do it for us this week on Original Soundchat. You can find me on Twitter at Pete Speakeasy. Joe is over at String Pixel. The video version of the show is on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, but it's that MP3 podcast version that you want, and that's hosted by Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. That's where Joe's other podcast, Smasherpieces, is hosted, and you can find Smasherpieces and original Soundchat wherever you get your podcasts on catchers all around the globe, including Spotify, where we have a feed of podcast episodes, but also a video game music playlist. And if we talk about a track on this show and it's on Spotify, it gets added to this big, huge playlist. Joe, what's being added this week?
Immortality is on Spotify, so that will be going on there. Obviously, like I said, I don't think Alone in the Dark ever got an official release, and it was an endeavor to find the version we are using for this show. So it is very obviously not on Spotify.
That makes sense. But good in Immortality. I couldn't find like an Immortality release on VGMDB. So I wonder if it was just like a digital thing. I'm really impressed and glad it's there. That's really cool. And when you're done listening, you can find the show on social media at Soundchat OST. Leave some feedback for us. How are we doing with the episodes? What did we miss in our music lists? And give us some suggestions for games to cover in the future. All right, Joe, who are we talking about next week?
I will be talking about Yutaka Minobe.
And I'll be talking about Soichi Noriki. All right, Joe, let's play us out.
I actually found one.
Whoa!
I'm surprised I didn't find more, to be honest, considering what the game is, but I found one. I think I found like two in general. A lot of remixes of Alone in the Dark 2, though, so apparently that game is well liked, which I think I knew, but that kind of further solidified that knowledge. But I did find what is referred to as a main theme cover by YouTuber Piano Possession, and it is an arrangement of the track that we referred to on the show as Walking About Deserto. And it's pretty good, so enjoy.
Thank you so much for listening this week on Original Sound Chat. We'll see you next time. Take care.